welcome back to our 5 and 5 series. You are joining me today in my home office underneath the house, which I loosely call the dungeon, where I record a lot of the podcasts, including Legal Unicorns, as you can see behind me. Today, absolutely delighted to be joined by Fayha Karimbux, leading in-house voice in Kenya. It's our, I think it's our second time back in Kenya for the 5 and 5 series. We previously interviewed someone on the practice side, and this time it's the in-house insight. Fayha's brilliant. She's a big friend of the firm. Not only has she willingly conducted the 5 and 5 interview and given her insights into the Kenyan legal market and the opportunities and from an in-house perspective, but she's also attended our African General Counsel Summit, which happens every February in Cape Town, and she was recently at our Leaders in Law event, which we hosted 2 weeks ago in Nairobi in Kenya, which was the first time we'd taken that event to Kenya. And for those of you who've not seen it, please check out all the links on LinkedIn and various other platforms, because it was a massive, massive success with about 130 of the leading in-house lawyers. Fayha is top of the tree. She's on top of her game. She really is one of the leading voices in the finance space in-house. She crossed over after 11 years at the leading law firm. I don't think it's unfair of me to say the leading law firm, ALN, in Kenya, and she gives both a real insight into doing a business across the African continent, where the opportunities are, what's growing, and what to look out for in the future. So thank you very much to Fayha for joining us again and for hosting the 5 and 5 from Kenya. Enjoy.
So in my view, business-wise, economically, there are a lot of factors that are influencing the business and economics, but I think what we're seeing overall is generally growth, slower, but it's still moving. I think if we compare to last year, the economy in Kenya cooled to around 4.7%. And that's down from the post-COVID highs, but that doesn't mean it's necessarily disastrous. I think our analysts are expecting a slight rebound this year, and I think this is helped significantly by the decent rains, which then obviously has a big impact on our agri sector, and the continued strength in services. I think connected to that, we're seeing inflation go down to around 4.5% from 7.7%. And the Kenya shilling has bounced back somewhat from a low of 160 to the dollar to about 129 now, there or thereabouts. So that's a big shift, and it's certainly having an effect on the economy, easing our imports, etc. And then I think in response to that, I'm sure you'll have heard and read, the central bank has also cut back its base rate to 10%. So I think the message is clear. It's time to stimulate growth and make credit a little cheaper for businesses, which is good for a thriving economy. On the tax side, again, this is always a tricky topic for Kenya, and there are a lot of political issues that are tied in, and certainly over the last couple of weeks, couple of days, this has had an effect, but we do continue to show resilience on all of this. I think certainly for the KRA, the regulator, the focus is very much on enforcement and closing off any loopholes. So I think what we're seeing is businesses seeking advice, seeking the right kind of structuring from a tax perspective to make sure that they are in compliance. And then I guess there's a last sort of point overall in terms of the economy business sector. The Nairobi Securities Exchange has surged. Investors are back. The Kenya Eurobond issuance is oversubscribed. So certainly I think we're seeing momentum again in capital markets, which is very good. We'll go into the sectors that are doing well at the moment in Kenya, as well as certain sector groups that help, act as a stakeholder, as a think tank to drive thought leadership, policy processes. I think from the private equity, venture capital point of view, if we look at groups such as the East African Venture Capital Association, the Africa Venture Capital Association, KEMSA from a very local perspective. I think all of this plays a part in the business environment. And then lastly, for us, in terms of investor sentiment, I think, just to underscore all the points, is generally positive. For us as AfricInvest, we have a number of strategies and funds to provide impact and investments across various sectors. An example of this would be our recently launched health fund, as well as our SME fund. So there is definitely a lot happening in terms of our pipeline. We're excited for our investments this year so far, and then for the second half of the year as well. At the same time, we are going through our fund cycles. Certain funds are at end of life, so we are looking at exits for the funds that are now coming up to such periods, and at the same time we are raising funds. So I think this really underscores the sentiment, certainly from an investor's point of view, around the business and economical environment in Kenya. In terms of the legal market, both from the perspective of practice and in-house, so for a bit of context, I left practice not so long ago, October 2024, and I've now moved into this in-house role. I think if I step back and reflect over the last 10 years or so, what we've seen is a lot of London-based law firms and South African-based law firms come into the Kenyan market. I think overall this has slowed in recent years, but overall a number of these London-based firms and South African firms do form associations with the local firms. If we take Bowman's, for example, ENS, IKM with DLA Piper, HHM with Denton's. I think what this has meant for the market is that it is exciting. There is definitely increased competition for work, and definitely very good quality legal services coming out of the Kenyan and overall East African market. However, over the last few years, I'd say there are no new entrants along these lines. Certainly at the sort of PE, M&A scope of services. So just in terms of the work that we're seeing, a lot of these firms do, I think it's the sort of mainstream corporate, so mergers, acquisitions, private equity, projects, infrastructure, finance, cross-border work, a lot of cross-border. I think Kenya, generally being regarded as a hub, also maintains that status when it comes to legal work, certainly across the regions. And I think some Kenyan firms have positioned themselves as regional players, given the trend of deals, and aim to provide clients such as ourselves with a one-stop shop, a one-stop solution, which is very helpful. And then on the in-house side, I would say that the market is vibrant. I have seen many opportunities across different sectors. I think for me, if I were to put a highlight on certain sectors for in-house roles, financial services, so banks, insurance companies, microfinance even, And then moving slightly away from that, more to do with fintech companies, real estate, that's always been a mainstay, and projects and infrastructure, certainly a lot of roles available from an in-house perspective in those areas. Growth opportunities in Kenya. Well, Kenya's economic landscape, I think, has always presented a dynamic array of investment opportunities, as we've discussed earlier on. And I think this is really driven by technological advancements, all the work Kenya has done and the focus it has put on a renewable energy initiative, and certainly a growing middle class, underscored by a very young, well-educated population. I think over the next year, next couple of years, short, medium term, the sectors I see that will be experiencing growth, agriculture, agribusiness, that's nothing new for Kenya, real estate, infrastructure, again, we're seeing demand being driven in the real estate sector, investments in logistical hubs, industrial parks, student housing are all gaining traction. Renewables, again, a huge focus on this, with over 70% of Kenya's electricity coming from renewable sources such as geothermal, wind and solar. It's always an exciting area where we will see, I think, continue to see growth. And the government is certainly behind this and pushing for clean energy projects. I think this is a lucrative opportunity for investors. And then, of course, technology and digital innovation. Again, I think Kenya is regarded as the Silicon Savannah, which is very exciting. And I think the sector is projected to grow significantly, driven primarily by advancements in digital technology, cybersecurity more and more playing a bigger role, artificial intelligence. If we look at initiatives such as Konza, Technopolis, these kind of initiatives are very central to the growth and attract both local and international tech companies. I think another sector is healthcare. This is expanding investments in pharmaceutical manufacturing and healthcare projects. Certainly something that we have our eye on with our health-focused funds. If we look at the projects such as the proposed smart vaccine facility, again in Konza, I think it highlights the sector's growth potential. Financial services, I think this has always been an exciting sector for investors in Kenya, and as discussed previously, with the CBK lowering its interest rates, I think the message to the market is quite clear. And if we combine that with the recent amendments to the CBK Act, which lift the moratorium on new institutions being licensed, I think what we will see as a result of this combination, plus core capital requirements going on an upward trend, is we will see definitely more consolidation amongst market players, and better quality of services. So that's anticipated in the short to medium future, I'd say. I think this does have to be balanced, though, somewhat with some of the recent judgments that have come out of the High Court. One that comes to mind is a recent one whereby foreign lenders are being required to register in Kenya. This appears to go against government policies, and appears to be based on a rather strange interpretation of the Companies Act, and potentially an inadvertent expansion of the definition of credit provider, pursuant to the CBK Act. This could have effects on DFIs, PE funds and international commercial banks. However, what we are seeing is a strong pushback from stakeholders, including the lawyers, the Law Society of Kenya, that are sort of rallying together to address the legislative issues and obtain further clarity. So not something we're particularly worried about, but something that is definitely on the radar. And then other sectors, I know I've been talking about this for some time now, retail, consumer, FMCG goods, manufacturing, tourism, hospitality, and mainstay for Kenya. I think we will continue to see growth in that sector too. In my view, the legal market is stabilized and fairly consolidated at the moment. Obviously, we're dealing with the same global issues around uncertainty at the moment, and we're certainly not immune to this. And I think given the current climate, firms are looking beyond traditional areas and expanding into new practice areas. They're investing a lot more in AI and tech to make their offerings more efficient. And I think a lot of firms are now also employing techies, so to speak, to drive that technological AI growth, and with an overall view of being more efficient in the market, which certainly, now that the shoe's on the other foot, is a welcome development. And I would anticipate that this would continue to develop over the next couple of years. I think overall, despite geopolitical tensions globally, despite the political issues locally, there is certainly resilience in Kenya. I think Kenya remains the regional hub for businesses in East and Central Africa, just with its positioning, and I think the general sphere to welcome investors and investments into the country and the region. As mentioned, there is a depth of professional services firms, not just the legal sector, but all across, that can advise that in a very apt manner around these investments and spaces. So I think it's overall good news, and we are investor friendly. We are looking forward to it. Certainly from a PE perspective, Kenya remains a hub, and we're excited for the rest of the year and looking into 2026 and beyond.